I couldn't believe that Tom was giving me the silent treatment right after our wedding. "What do you want for dinner tonight?" As soon as I finished work, I asked Tom, but he didn't even bother to respond. This had become the norm in our household. Then one day, I got a message from Tom.
I had an accident. I need you to come right away to help with the hospital admission paperwork.
Tom's voice came through, sounding panicked. "You're only relying on me now. How convenient." "I need to get ready, so I'm going to hang up for now. Now is the time to get my revenge." I immediately started packing my clothes into my bag. I'm Mary, and I turned 45 this year. I met my husband, Tom, through a matchmaking agency. Since I work from home, I don't get many opportunities to meet new people. I was ready to stay single, but my mom cried and begged me to try dating. She was deeply worried about me spending my life alone. When I registered with the agency, the planner introduced me to several men. I went on a few arranged dates, but they all hesitated when they found out my age. Apparently, being in your late 40s makes things pretty tough. Of course, some men were still interested, but they were all in their 60s and already retired. On top of that, some openly said they were looking for someone to take care of them, which left me feeling bewildered. I felt like no one saw me as a woman anymore, and I was ready to give up on dating and focus on making money and saving for retirement. Just then, I met Tom. My planner, seeing how hard things were going for me, introduced Tom as a special match. Tom was also 45, just like me, and he looked quite charming. During our arranged date, he spoke to me warmly and cheerfully. He worked in sales, and I admired his dedication and hard work. I thought someone as wonderful as him would quickly find a match, so I didn't expect anything. But after some time, Tom asked if we could try dating. I was thrilled because he was exactly the kind of man I wanted to marry. After going on a few dates, we graduated from the matchmaking agency and began a relationship with marriage in mind. In this agency, many couples would get married right after graduating. So we decided to register our marriage first and have the wedding ceremony 6 months later. We delayed the ceremony because venues were fully booked, and the soonest available date was 6 months out. Even though the wedding was still ahead, we started living together since we had already registered our marriage. We found a nice place close to the station, and I rented it under my name. The reason the lease was in my name was because Tom asked me to do it. Since I spent more time at home, Tom's request didn't seem strange to me. I finally felt like I was experiencing the happiness of being a woman, and I was dreaming of our future life together. But a while after we started living together, Tom came home one day looking dejected.
I'm home.
Seeing how pale he looked, I asked with concern, "What's wrong?" Tom began to speak slowly.
Today, I made a huge mistake with my client. They yelled at me, and it looks like the deal might fall through. I might not be able to stay at my job anymore.
He looked completely defeated. I see. I couldn't say anything more. It was the first time I'd seen Tom, who was always so cheerful, look like this. Even though he kept going to work, he seemed down. Every morning, he left with a somber face. He seemed so lifeless that it made me genuinely worried. Wanting Tom to be happy again, I made a suggestion when he came home from work. "Why don't you just quit your job?" Tom looked at me with a pained expression.
Are you really okay with that?
I smiled brightly and said, "Yeah, I work from home, so you don't have to worry about money. You can take a break and just be a stay-at-home husband for a while." At that moment, a tear rolled down Tom's cheek.
I'm sorry. We just got married, and now this happens. And weddings are expensive.
He kept apologizing through his tears, and I did my best to comfort him. I believe that since we were partners in life, even though this happened right after we got married, Tom and I would be okay. But I didn't realize at the time how wrong I was. In reality, Tom was secretly smirking and whispered, just as planned, too softly for me to hear. Not long after, Tom quit his job. He started handling the housework as a stay-at-home husband. But since he had always lived with his parents, he had no experience with chores. His scrambled eggs were burnt to a crisp, and when he hung up the laundry, it was all wrinkled. Every time something went wrong, he'd apologize sheepishly.
I want to do my best with the housework since you're working so hard, but I just can't seem to get it right. Sorry.
Nobody gets it right on the first try. Even when my mom taught me to cook, I once burned the fish completely. So I smiled at Tom, who looked so apologetic, and said, "Nobody is perfect from the start. I'll do it with you, so let's give it our best shot, okay?" After that, I started helping him with the chores he was responsible for. At first, Tom and I worked together on the chores, but gradually he stopped helping. Even when I asked him to make dinner, he refused.
Your cooking tastes better, Mary, and I want to eat your food. So, can you make dinner?
It was the same with the laundry.
The clothes dry faster when you do it. I'll press the button on the washer. Can you hang them up?
But this is no different from before you quit your job. Tom's share of the chores kept shrinking, and the burden on me grew heavier. Still, our household was 100% supported by my income. When I tried to ask Tom to help out, he brushed it off easily.
Oh, it's almost time for the flash sale. Curry powder is on special today. You love curry, right, Mary? I'll go grab some now.
With that, Tom rushed out the door. It was true. I did love curry. I appreciated that Tom thought of my favorite food, but something felt off, so I muttered to myself, "Tom always takes forever when he goes shopping. Just where is he going?" I was grateful he did the shopping, but spending over 2 hours on it was too much. I figured being a stay-at-home husband gave him a slower pace of life. All I could do was shake my head at his laid-back attitude. Even so, our married life went on. Tom gradually started to seem more cheerful, but there was no sign of him looking for a new job. In fact, he was getting even more careless than he was before he quit. One day, after finishing my remote work, I stepped out of the room and noticed something right away. Tom left his socks lying around again. Lately, Tom had been doing almost nothing as a stay-at-home husband. He hardly ever cooked, and he didn't even press the button to start the laundry anymore. The only chore he still did was the shopping. But even that took him forever. On top of that, after shopping, he would dictate what we should have for dinner, which was a hassle. If it was a complicated dish, I'd have to look up the recipe online to figure out how to make it. Our marriage couldn't go on like this. And tomorrow was our wedding ceremony. With such an important milestone coming up, I figured it was time for us to have a serious talk about our future. So I decided to speak with Tom during dinner. But then, Tom dropped a bombshell. That evening during dinner, as we sat down to eat the meal I had prepared, Tom made a suggestion.
Tomorrow's finally our wedding day, right? Once that's over, there won't be any big expenses. So starting next month, can you give me an allowance? Like $300 a month?
I was stunned by his request. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Why should I give you an allowance? I'm already paying for everything." Tom frowned and replied,
Well, I'm a stay-at-home husband. Since I'm taking care of the house, I should get something back from the household budget.
I was shocked by his words. If he were actually doing his share of the chores, I wouldn't have minded giving him some money from my income. But lately, the only thing Tom did was the shopping. I was handling everything else. All Tom did during the day, aside from shopping, was watch TV at full volume. I told Tom what had been on my mind. "All you're doing is the grocery shopping, right? And giving me instructions for dinner. I handle everything else. On top of that, I pay for the rent, utilities, and groceries. Don't you think that's unfair?" Tom used money from my wallet without asking and went grocery shopping. Sometimes, though, I had no idea where the money went, and all that was left in my wallet were a few coins. And I did all the cooking and the cleanup afterward. Even the household chores are unevenly split. Why does Tom think he deserves an allowance from me? Tom looked at me with a condescending expression.
So that's how you see me, right? You were the one who told me I could be a stay-at-home husband. Isn't this pretty irresponsible of you?
With that, he stood up in a huff and slammed the door to his room. Of course, he left his dirty dishes on the table. Have I been unreasonable? Our wedding is tomorrow, and now things are tense between us. This is the worst. Feeling dejected, I cleaned up and went to bed. The next day, Tom and I headed to the wedding venue. It was just a small ceremony with only our parents attending. I was anxious that Tom might still be in a bad mood. But my worries turned out to be unfounded.
Mary, my mom wants to talk to you.
Tom called out to me with a smile. "Okay." I then found myself speaking with his mother, Emily, who turned out to be very kind.
"So you're Mary? Thank you for marrying Tom. If you ever have any concerns, feel free to talk to me anytime."
Emily spoke warmly and cheerfully. She lived alone, about an hour away by train. I also learned that she had divorced Tom's father and no longer saw him. Honestly, I was deeply troubled about Tom, but since today was our wedding day, I thought bringing it up would only ruin the moment. "It's okay," I just reassured Emily with those words.
I'm tired. I'm going home first.
Right after the ceremony ended, Tom said that and left by himself. I couldn't go with him because I still had to handle the payments. Emily and my parents were worried about me because of Tom's behavior. Maybe Tom was just nervous. I tried to cover for him and somehow convince them it was fine. By the time I finished settling everything and got home, it was already dark. The lights were on inside the house. "I'm home." When I walked into the living room, Tom was sitting at the table, staring at his phone. On the table were groceries he had apparently bought. Hiding my frustration about why he left early, I spoke to him cheerfully. "Did you go shopping? Thanks." But Tom didn't respond. No matter how much I spoke to him, he didn't reply or even look at me. I couldn't believe that he was giving me the silent treatment right after our wedding. Did I say something to upset him when I was talking to Emily? Tom seemed to adore his mother. I felt anxious, but since Tom clearly wasn't ready to talk, I decided to give him some time. However, even after 6 months, his attitude hadn't changed. "What's for dinner tonight?" As soon as I finished work, I asked Tom. But he didn't even bother to respond. This had become the norm in our household. Day after day, I was left guessing what Tom wanted for dinner and cooking meals with the groceries he bought. Since I worked from home, Tom was the only person I could talk to regularly, and this situation was wearing me down. It got so bad that I tried confronting him directly. "Enough is enough. If you have a problem, you need to say something." But no matter how much I said, Tom remained silent. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. Meanwhile, money kept disappearing from my wallet. Even though he was supposedly shopping, the amounts were getting larger and larger. How long is this going to go on? Maybe I should just get a divorce. I was starting to think that way. But getting divorced so soon after marriage would break my parents' hearts. And Emily was a kind, down-to-earth person, and we got along well. If I divorced Tom, I knew it would devastate her. Neither my parents nor Emily knew that Tom was a stay-at-home husband. My parents would definitely disapprove, and Emily, being the kind person she was, would feel the need to apologize to me. I didn't want to stir up the trouble, so I couldn't say anything to either family. But the thought of continuing to suffer alone was painful. I kept agonizing over what to do. One day, I got a call from Tom. That day, as usual, he had gone out shopping. I figured he'd be gone for at least 2 hours, but this time, even half a day later, he hadn't come back. Did something happen to him? Just as I thought that, my phone rang, and I answered immediately. "You're late coming home. What happened?" In response to my question, Tom said something shocking.
I had an accident. I need you to come right away to help with the hospital admission paperwork.
"What?" Tom's voice sounded urgent. I was stunned by what he said. When I asked for more details, he explained that he had fallen badly while shopping and hurt his leg. The doctor said he had a fracture. To make matters worse, the injury was severe enough that he couldn't stand on his own.
They said I'll need to use a wheelchair now. If you can take care of me at home, I won't need long-term hospitalization.
Apparently, after about 2 weeks in the hospital, he could continue with regular outpatient visits. If he was certified as needing care, he could also qualify for support services. According to the doctor, Tom already met the criteria for needing care. But if I had to care for him, it would affect my remote work. What should I do? I was torn. But then I heard a faint voice in the background of the call, and a wave of cold clarity washed over me. What? Tom didn't seem to notice my reaction and continued to plead.
You're the only one I can count on, Mary. Please, come right away.
His voice sounded desperate. The old me would have rushed to his side, but the voice I just heard over the phone filled me with anger. You're only relying on me now. How convenient. I told Tom. I need to get ready, so I'm going to hang up for now. Now is the time to get my revenge. I immediately started packing my clothes into my bag. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the front door immediately. Yes, thank you for coming. Standing there was the handyman service I had called. After Tom's phone call, I had contacted a service that could handle urgent moves. Can you help me move out today? I requested the move on the spot. I sent everything I had purchased to my parents' home and shipped Tom's belongings back to his parents' house. In the process, I finally informed both families. I'm divorcing Tom. Both families were shocked, but once I explained the details, they understood. In fact, my parents were furious, and Emily kept apologizing to me over and over.
I'm so sorry for all the trouble Tom caused you. If there's anything I can do, just let me know.
Trusting Emily's words, I made a request. She was surprised at first, but fortunately, she agreed right away. After informing both families, I made a few more calls. Getting a divorce turned out to be a busy process. Within just 3 hours, the apartment was emptied out. Even though I had lived with Tom, the place now felt so empty and lifeless. During this time, Tom called me multiple times, but I ignored every call. Finally, I informed the management company that I was vacating the apartment. 5 days went by, and my phone was still ringing constantly. I thought it was odd he could make so many calls from the hospital. But with the constant calls starting to disrupt my work, I reluctantly decided to answer the phone. I picked up the call and stayed silent out of spite. The moment the call connected, Tom's voice flared up.
Why haven't you come to see me? I've been stuck renting hospital clothes.
I didn't care in the slightest. So, I remained silent.
Why aren't you saying anything? That's just rude.
He was the one who had ignored me all this time. But listening to him go on like this was annoying. I can't hear you. Maybe the signal's bad? For some reason, Tom accepted that explanation.
Well, it's a hospital, so I guess the signal sucks. Just come pick me up when I'm discharged. I can't get around in a wheelchair by myself.
He said it with such arrogance. How dare he say that? I thought to myself, but to keep up my plan, I stayed calm. Okay, that seemed to satisfy him.
Oh, and bring some cash for the hospital fees. They need to be paid when I'm discharged. See you later.
With that, Tom hung up, apparently pleased with himself. I'm going to pay for his hospital bills. I muttered to myself, gripping my phone tightly. 2 weeks later, the day of Tom's discharge finally arrived. I opened the door to his hospital room. Tom, still dressed in his hospital gown, greeted me.
"Oh, you finally showed up. I'm getting discharged, so hurry up and give me my clothes. And take care of the discharge paperwork too."
He waved his hand lazily and looked at me. But I owed Tom no such favors. "I didn't bring you any clothes." When I said that, Tom got irritated.
"Are you serious? So, you expect me to wear the dirty clothes I was injured in? They're filthy and unwearable."
He glared at me. After becoming a stay-at-home husband, Tom had done whatever he pleased. And right after our wedding, he had started ignoring me. "I've had enough," I told him. "Isn't your girlfriend's name Nancy? Why don't you ask her to bring you some clothes?" At the mention of that name, Tom's face filled with panic.
"Where did you hear that name?"
His face turned pale. I shoved a document in his direction. "It's all in this report. I know you've been seeing Nancy since before we got married."
"What?"
The day Tom was hospitalized, I had heard a woman's voice on the phone.
"Tom, hang up now."
She had called him by name. That's how I knew he was cheating. Right after I hung up that day, while I was in the middle of moving out, I called a private investigator to look into it. The affair was already confirmed, but I needed to know who the woman was. 2 days ago, I received the results of the investigation. "Nancy, the woman you met on that dating site, right? And she's married, isn't she? So you can't exactly marry her, can you?" According to the investigation, Nancy was married and had an older husband. She was also a stay-at-home wife. Tom liked Nancy, but neither of them had much money to spend freely. So, under the pretense of grocery shopping, Tom went on countless daytime dates with her. Of course, the money for those dates came from my wallet. It was beyond insulting. I handed Tom the investigation report.
"What the hell is this?"
At first, he glanced at the documents suspiciously, but then he began to stare at them intently.
"You had no right to investigate me. You coward."
He shouted and threw the papers. So this is Tom's true nature. I looked at him coldly and said, "Coward? That's rich coming from a cheater, and you lied about your job too. You never worked in sales, did you?"
"How did you know that?"
Tom looked at me in shock. In reality, his story about working as a salesman was a complete lie. He had been a part-timer, wandering around aimlessly. This was also revealed by the investigator. The matchmaking agency I had used only required an ID, not proof of employment. That's how he got away with it. When I explained this to Tom calmly, he clenched his jaw, his face full of frustration.
"I thought someone clueless enough to work from home would be easy to fool."
Tom clenched his fist as he said this. "Why did you marry me?" I couldn't understand why he went through the trouble of marrying someone he didn't even like. His next words were the worst thing I could hear.
"To live an easy life, of course. I've always hated working. I figured a woman in her 40s who was desperate to get married would have plenty of money. I planned to make you cover all my expenses. It was all going perfectly at first."
Tom said this with a smug smile. What a disgusting excuse for a man. You thought of me as nothing more than someone convenient. I muttered to Tom, who now looked completely defeated. He had been using me from the beginning. His love was not there. For someone who had dreamed of a happy married life with Tom, this was a deep betrayal. You're going to regret this, Tom. I dug through my bag and pulled out a piece of paper. Then we're getting a divorce, right? I've already prepared the divorce papers. Just sign them. I showed him the document with my part already filled out.
Seriously?
Tom looked shocked, unable to keep up with the situation. But he quickly recovered and laughed mockingly.
Do you even know how divorce papers work? You need witnesses to sign them too, not just our signatures. You really are clueless.
He laughed so hard he clutched his stomach. I can't believe he's so delusional. How disappointing, as if I'd come to a place like this alone. Don't worry about witnesses. I brought one with me today.
What do you mean?
Just as Tom raised his voice, the hospital room door swung open.
Well, look who we have here. A cheating husband who doesn't know how to treat Mary right.
It was Emily standing in the doorway.
Geez, Mom, why are you here?
Tom hadn't expected Emily to show up, and he looked genuinely shocked. Since Emily's home was an hour away by train, it wasn't surprising that Tom was caught off guard. In fact, when I told Emily about Tom's affair, I had said, I want to get revenge on Tom on the day of his discharge. Will you help me? After hearing everything Tom had done to me, Emily readily agreed. That's why she had come to the hospital with me. When I explained this, Tom was visibly flustered.
This can't be real, Mom.
Emily ignored him. She probably did it intentionally, knowing how he had been ignoring me. That cold shoulder from his own mother seemed to sting Tom deeply. She's not the only one I called.
What do you mean?
As Tom froze in confusion, a voice came from behind Emily.
Tom,
Nancy, why are you here?
Seeing Nancy, his shock turned to sheer panic. Nancy looked extremely uncomfortable. Her eyes darted around, and her mouth twisted awkwardly. I called her. After all, everyone involved should be here, right? When I found out that Tom's mistress was Nancy, the investigator also provided her contact information, so I reached out to her immediately.
who are you?
Does Tom's wife ring a bell?
How did you get my number?
Nancy was in a complete panic over the phone. I told Nancy to come with me to the hospital on Tom's discharge day. I could show the investigation report to your husband, you know? Are you ready to be on your own? At first, Nancy hesitated, but my words broke her resolve.
Fine, I'll come. Just don't show the report to my husband.
And that's how she ended up here. Now, can you hurry up and fill out your section, Tom? These two will serve as witnesses.
Why should I?
I handed Tom the divorce papers and a pen, but he refused. Emily scolded him.
This is all your fault for cheating, Tom. Show some integrity and sign the papers now.
Nancy also pleaded with him.
Please, just sign it. If the divorce drags out and it goes to court, both you and I are finished.
Why?
relentlessly pressured by the two of them to sign the divorce papers. Tom finally gave in, his face weary, and handed the papers over.
There. Happy now?
I smiled brightly. Great, I'll file these divorce papers right away. We'll officially be strangers. Maybe now you'll have a shot at marrying Nancy. Tom's face lit up with joy.
Nancy, I'm single again and we can get married.
But Nancy shot him a cold glare.
I have no intention of marrying you, Tom. You were just a fling. That should be obvious.
What?
Tom and Nancy started arguing. Nancy had made it clear to me beforehand that she had no plans to leave her husband. It turned out to be nothing more than Tom's selfish delusion. I turned to the two of them still arguing and declared, "Oh, and I'm not paying for your hospital bills. We're strangers now, remember?"
I'm a stay-at-home husband. I don't have a job or income. Are you really going to abandon me?
I don't care about strangers. Maybe you should ask Nancy over there? Also, I've already canceled the lease, so you don't have a place to live.
Your stuff is at my place, but I don't want a useless son living with me. Why don't you and Nancy figure it out?"
Emily added with an icy glare. Tom was stunned, visibly shaken by all this.
This can't be happening. What am I supposed to do now? I'm injured and stuck in a wheelchair.
Well, enjoy living with your regrets. Goodbye. With that, I left the hospital room with Emily, leaving Tom and Nancy behind. I was certain they'd both self-destruct without any help. I smirked to myself. A month later, things had gone downhill for Tom and Nancy. First, Tom couldn't pay his hospital bills. He called me and Emily repeatedly for help, but we ignored him. Eventually, he relied on his friends to cover the costs. With his care needs and limited mobility, it must have been a struggle. Being in a wheelchair severely limited his mobility, and asking his friends for help seemed like a struggle. Because of that, I received bitter and resentful voicemails from Tom. Tom was now jobless and homeless. Emily had turned him away and blocked his number. His friends, tired of waiting for their money back, had also cut ties with him. Desperate, Tom even showed up at Nancy's house. Her husband found out, and now Nancy was in the middle of divorce proceedings. Of course, both Tom and Nancy were being sued for damages by Nancy's husband. I also planned to file a claim through my lawyer, so Nancy and Tom would surely end up drowning in debt. According to what Emily told me, Tom and Nancy got remarried afterward. Apparently, this was one of the conditions set by Nancy's husband during the divorce. If Nancy married Tom, her husband agreed to reduce the alimony she owed. To me, marrying someone you don't truly love sounds like a nightmare. As expected, Tom and Nancy argued constantly. Emily received pitiful letters from Tom, detailing his miserable situation. Since he had no money and couldn't visit Emily's home in a wheelchair, he resorted to writing letters to get her sympathy. That was so typical of Tom. I no longer wanted anything to do with him, so I planned to let my lawyer handle everything. Tom kept trying to contact me, but I intended to ignore him forever. Relying on others for money had ultimately ruined both Tom and Nancy. They were both old enough that rejoining society would be difficult. Their lives would never return to how they once were. Well, they can struggle all they want. Since then, I've met with Emily several times. Unlike Tom, Emily was a decent and reasonable person. She helped me a lot during my divorce. We even discovered we shared a hobby. Both Emily and I loved handmade crafts. Emily enjoyed making beaded jewelry, and I loved making resin accessories. In fact, my remote work centered around this handmade craft business. I ran my own online shop and occasionally sold my pieces at community markets. Emily and I were now planning to set up a booth together at the market. At first, my parents were worried about my divorce, but seeing me happy again reassured them. I might not have found the right partner, but I was grateful to have a friend who shared my passion. Recently, through the community market, I even met someone special. Marriage was still a long way off, but someday, I hope to wear a wedding dress. I'll keep looking forward and doing my best.